We're up here on top of Mount Marcy, just waiting for the sun to rise. Day 2 of the Northville Blasted Trail is in the books. Well, life doesn't get much better than this open ridge walk on Jay Mountain, and we're at the summit of Lower Wolfjaw, our 8th high peak of the day here on the Great Range Traverse. Well, it's 4:30 a.m., heading a big slide today, and it's -4 degrees here at the parking lot. Bushwhacking our way up Green Mountain, and I have to say, the trees are winning this fight today. Well, the sun is shining and the wind is whipping here up on Haystack. Next stop, Saddleback Cliffs. Cock-a-doodle-doo from the summit of Rooster Combe. Scarface might be the most underrated hike in the entire park. 60-mile-an-hour winds up on Hurricane. Very fitting, cruising up the Bald Rock slab here on Bald Mountain. Standing up here on the summit of Catamount Mountain, Iroquois, Mount Van Hovenberg, Skylight, Santanoni. You're listening to the 46 of 46 podcast. Climbing mountains in every season of the year comes with challenges and natural elements to be cautious of. But the more we know, and the more prepared we can be ahead of time, the more successful we stand to be out there. Winter hiking, however, comes with significantly more risk, but in my opinion more reward, than summer hiking does. There are many more elements to be aware of while you're wandering through the snow-covered woods, like avalanches, thin ice, hypothermia, frostbite, spruce traps, getting lost, having to stay out there for an unexpected overnight, and just so many more factors. The facts of the matter are that you always assume a good amount of risk when you venture into the backcountry, but in the winter, even on clear sunny days, you assume even more risk than normal. So it's important to be prepared as well as you can be. So this week on the 46 of 46 podcast, I'll dive into some of these subjects to give you insight on what they are, how they occur, when they occur, and what to do in case of an emergency. Each of these subjects could be an entire episode series here on the podcast, since there's so much to learn about them all. So today I'm just going to skim the surface of each subject. And I'm going to start with the big one, the avalanche. As always, the first step in the process is to do your homework, and the National Weather Service website, weather.gov, is a great place to start to look at avalanche conditions wherever you're heading, whether you're skiing, you're hiking, whatever. In short, an avalanche is a mass of snow moving down a slope. That is the definition. So in mountainous terrain like the Adirondack Park, they certainly happen. Avalanche Lake, anyone? According to the National Avalanche Center, roughly 45 people die every winter in North America due to avalanches, with many more suffering injuries from avalanche. I can't think of many worse ways to potentially die than being swept away in an avalanche, so it is important to have at least a basic understanding of how they happen, when they happen, and what to look for. And some days are very dangerous, and then other days aren't. So we will dive in. Avalanche terrain is defined as snow-covered slopes steeper than 30 degrees and any terrain underneath those slopes. So just 30 degrees, that's not that steep. So be aware. Most avalanches occur on terrain between 30 and 50 degrees, though they can occur on any slope. Avalanches are caused by 4 factors: a slope, snow cover, a weak layer in the snow cover, and a trigger. Something got to start the avalanche, right? In fatal avalanches, roughly 90% of deaths are triggered by the victim or someone in the victim's group. Something to be aware of. Most are naturally triggered, meaning the weather, wind, snow, rain, sun. But whatever stresses the snowpack to its breaking point, thus causing it to break. And here's another statistic for you. There's a 30% chance of survival when buried by an avalanche. So the odds of survival aren't great, but hey, 30% does still give you a fighting chance if you find yourself in such a predicament. Now, when do they occur? Most avalanches occur during or just after snowstorms on those slopes I mentioned before, between 30 and 50 degrees. Significant snowfall may result in an unstable snowpack, so the best practice is typically to wait at least 36 hours after a big snow or a big windstorm before you go into the mountains, thus allowing the snow to become more stable and to settle into itself, and therefore less likely to avalanche. Now, what to do if you get caught in an avalanche? Obviously, way easier said than done, but it's good to talk about it. If you get caught in an avalanche, try to push heavy objects or heavy equipment away from you to avoid injury. Grab onto anything solid that you might be able to, trees, rocks, whatever, to avoid being swept away. Try to keep your mouth closed and your teeth clenched. And if you start moving downward with the avalanche, you got to do everything you can to attempt to stay on the surface by using a swimming motion. And try to move yourself to the side of the avalanche if possible. Obviously, all this is easier said than done, but hey, these are the tips and these are the tricks. So when the avalanche does start to slow down, you should attempt to push yourself towards the surface, and you can even try to make an air pocket in front of your face using one of your arms, which will be good. Most people die in avalanches from asphyxiation, so it's good to know this. Then you use the other arm to push towards the surface. And then when the avalanche does come to a stop, it's time to try to dig yourself out. That's the goal. You want to relax your breathing, and particularly if you cannot dig yourself out, slow down that breathing. And you got to try to stay calm and only shout when you know that a searcher is near you. If someone in your hiking group gets trapped, it should go without saying, but I will say it. Do not leave him or her there to go find help. A person typically only has about 15 minutes or so to survive when they're inside of an avalanche. So looking for them is crucial. Time is of the essence. And yes, again, easier said than done, but this is the situation. Now we'll talk some gear, since I know there's a lot of gear nerds out there. I am not one of them, but it's good to know the equipment that some people have. So some avalanche gear that backcountry skiers and recreationists have with them to combat avalanches often include an airbag, which is literally an airbag that's kind of in your backpack. Therefore, you get sucked under the avalanche, you deploy the airbag, and now it's kind of, it's no different than if you were in the water. You're now up at the surface. Probes to, check the snow level, check the snowpack, avalanche beacon, and assessment tools. These are typically not items that most winter hikers will have in their backpacks, but again, you assume all responsibility and all risk when you're venturing into the woods, so I wanted to list some avalanche-specific gear that is out there, since the more you know, right? Again, this subject could be an entire podcast series, but this is a 101 series, so let's sum up avalanches now. Check avalanche forecast at the National Weather Service website, weather.gov, because knowing current and future conditions will help you make good decisions when you're in the backcountry. Most avalanches occur on slopes from 30 to 50 degrees, but they can happen anywhere. People often trigger avalanches, but not always. If you get swept away in an avalanche, try to clench your mouth, teeth shut, try swimming to the top or the side of the avalanche, and try grabbing onto anything solid like a tree or a rock to help keep yourself from being swept away. Don't leave your hiking partner to go get help. Most people only have 15 minutes left to survive. And if you do get buried, just fight like hell to survive to get to the surface. Yes, there's only a 30% chance of survival, but 30% is better than no percent. And then there's the old tip that people often use, which is trying to clear a space in front of your face when you're inside the avalanche, when you've stopped, and then spit. Gravity will tell you which way is up based on where the spit drops. Of course, if it drops downward, up is the opposite direction, and that way you can try to get to the surface. There's been plenty of stories of people caught in avalanches, and they were swimming and they were only a foot or two underneath the surface, but they were going sideways because, again, they didn't know which way was up. So that's just a little tip I've heard a lot of people use in the past. Of course, I've never been in an avalanche, so I can't verify that will work, but that is a tip I've heard from many different people over the years. Moving on. Now that we've hit something that will kill you from the outside in the name of avalanches, now let's talk about something that kills you from the inside. Hypothermia. Isn't winter hiking fun? Hypothermia is a medical emergency that occurs when your body loses heat faster than it can produce heat, causing a dangerously low body temperature. Your normal body temperature, as we all know, is 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit or 37 degrees Celsius. Hypothermia occurs as your body temperature falls below 95 degrees Fahrenheit or 35 Celsius. And a person can die from hypothermia in less than 1 hour. So it can go from no hypothermia to death in less than an hour. So time is, again, of the essence. And hypothermia causes around 1,500 deaths in the United States every year. 1,500. It's a lot. The most common causes are exposure to cold weather conditions or cold water. Being outside, wet, unable to get dry in the dead of winter puts you at high risk for hypothermia, which is why it's so important to regulate that body heat while you're hiking and do whatever you can to avoid sweating. Or at the very least, just stay as dry as possible, given the sweat. Carry multiple shirts to change into throughout the day if you have to. I certainly do. Must stay dry out there. The 3 stages of hypothermia are as follows. The first stage, which typically involves shivering and a reduced circulation. The second stage involves a slower, weak pulse, slowed breathing, a lack of coordination, irritability, confusion, and a sleepy behavior. You've all heard when you have hypothermia, do not go to sleep. You will not wake up. We've seen it in movies, and I'm sure many of you are aware of that in real life. And then finally, the advanced stage where you have a slow, weak, or just absent respiration and pulse, and the person may also lose consciousness and will not wake up. I'm going to get into this in more detail here. But hypothermia typically starts out mild, but it progresses rapidly. And as I mentioned, hypothermia can come on and kill someone in less than 1 hour if left untreated. So it is serious business. So let's talk some signs and symptoms now. So you have mild hypothermia and severe hypothermia. Mild obviously being early on, severe being towards the end, sadly. So you want to be aware of these things early on so that you can keep it from getting to severe and you can do something about it right from the get-go. So this is not something to be taken lightly. When you start to see these symptoms in someone in your hiking group or in yourself, it is time to stop and it is time to deal with it right now. But anyways, let's talk mild hypothermia. Here's a symptom: shivering. Being cold happens in the mountains in the winter, so shivering is an early sign though. But of course, shivering doesn't necessarily mean that you now have hypothermia coming on. It could mean, hey, it's just time to toss on another layer. But be mindful when you are shivering and take mental notes of how you feel and do what you can to warm up. Throw that extra layer on, stop to warm up, whatever you got to do. Get the shivering to go away. Now, this next symptom, however, is a telltale sign that something is wrong, and I'm sure many of you who know something about hypothermia, that you're pretty familiar with this. But when someone comes down with a case of the umbles, now you might be asking, James, what are the umbles? What a strange word. Well, I'm glad you asked. The umbles involve stumbling, mumbling, and fumbling. When a person starts to stumble on their feet and they become clumsy, or they start to mumble when they speak, or they fumble around anything that they're trying to hold on to. The umbles. Mumbling, stumbling, fumbling, just basically uncoordinated. That is a telltale sign that they are experiencing hypothermia, and it is time to stop. So take note if you or someone in your group starts to become clumsy and fumbling around, stumbling around, or mumbling when they speak. It is time to take immediate action. Get them into dry clothes. Get them out of the wet clothes. If you have those spare base layers, like I mentioned, to bring, get them into those spare dry base layers. Get some layers on. Put your body heat against them. Get them to warm up. It is time to take action. Now, another sign to take note of is a big change in the hiker's personality, and often the person becomes extremely quiet, which means their mind and their body are starting to shut down. So that is another sign, if just personality shift and not saying much. And of course, you're out there in the winter, you could be just like miserable and pissed off and not having fun anymore. But it's up to you guys to determine if something is drastically different or if something is wrong. So, how to treat these mild hypothermia cases before they become severe. Get out of areas of exposure for starters. So, if you're above tree line, get back into the tree line, get out of the elements the best you can. Add some insulating clothing layers, such as more layers. Get them out of the wet clothes. Replace those wet clothes with dry ones, especially those base layers. Sometimes you might need them to exercise in short bursts to generate some body heat, jumping jacks, that sort of thing. And you also need to hydrate, eat food to generate energy, get some salt in your body, get everything working. Those are some easy, quick ways to deal with hypothermia, and that's what you want to do immediately. Again, do not wait. Don't be like, it's probably fine. Nope, just stop. Deal with it right now. You do not want it to get severe because out in the winter, things happen very quickly. All right, so now let's move on to some severe hypothermia, which is when a person has moved past that mild stage and into severe. And some of those symptoms include a body temperature below 90 degrees. And get this, there will no longer be shivering. They'll actually start to feel very warm. They'll have a severe lack of coordination and incoherence, aka an extreme case of the umbles. And then towards the end, there is, as many of you have heard about, the paradoxical undressing, which is a phenomenon where the victims basically, despite the low environmental temperatures, they just start removing all of their clothes due to feeling really warm all of a sudden. And when this happens, death, sadly, is near. Yeah, scary stuff, but, that's what it is. Hypothermia is scary. In terms of treatment regarding severe hypothermia, the person is in a critical situation by this point. The best treatment really does just continuing to do the other things, get them out of the elements, and just get them warm the best you can. Get the wet clothes off, get the dry clothes on, and keep them awake, keep them dry, and keep them alert, hydrate them with fuel. Same type of treatment when you're out there in the woods. And also, at that point too, it's time to get out of the woods. So that's another thing I should have mentioned. But yeah, it's time to get out of the woods. Your hike is over. Some additional treatment tips and tactics include getting them in a sleeping bag. If you guys have a sleeping bag with you, get them in that to also obviously make them warmer. And then maybe you get in the sleeping bag with them. Transfer your body heat to them. This is not a time to be shy. If you got to hug them and hold them, do what you got to do. Transfer your body heat to them. Hand warmers in the groin and the armpits. I mentioned that in the first episode of this series, but that's a quick way to start to warm up too. And, basically, again, the key is just getting them into dry clothing and dry layers, which is why it's so important to have those extra clothes with you. It can literally be the difference between life and death. Do whatever you have to do. All right, to sum up, hypothermia. It is an emergency that occurs when your body loses heat faster than it can produce heat. It occurs as your body temperature falls under 95 degrees Fahrenheit. A person can go from okay to dead via hypothermia in less than 1 hour. Some telltale signs of mild hypothermia include shivering and the umbles, aka mumbling, fumbling, and stumbling, and just general lack of coordination, and just kind of being out of it. And then severe hypothermia has victims no longer shivering, severely incoherent and uncoordinated, and then paradoxical undressing may occur. This is severe. Now, when you see these symptoms occur, it is time to stop hiking, get out of the wet clothes and into dry clothes, and warm up as much as possible, even if that means starting a fire, while also hydrating and feeding the victims. It is time to act fast, and it is time to act now, as soon as these symptoms begin. All right, hypothermia, it's the real deal. Moving on. Now let's talk about frostbite. Frostbite is an injury caused by freezing of the skin and the underlying tissues. In the early stages of frostbite, which is called frost nip, there isn't really permanent damage to your skin, but symptoms include cold skin and a prickling feeling, followed by numbness and inflamed or discolored skin. Frostbite is treatable, but it can also be potentially serious condition requiring amputation of those toes, those fingers, or even whole limbs depending on the severity. So yeah, it is, again, something to be taken seriously and something to avoid. But when does frostbite occur, you ask? Well, when it's cold outside, skin that's not covered may get red or sore, and this is called frost nip. And it's an early warning sign of frostbite. So if this does happen, it is time to find some warm shelter and find it quickly. Symptoms of frostbite depend on how deep it goes into your body, but there are 3 stages. These early frostbite affects the top layers of the skin, and then more advanced cases can go all the way to the bones. So some symptoms of the early stages: your skin will turn a pale yellow or white, and it may itch, sting, burn, or just kind of feel like pins and needles. Then the intermediate stage is when the skin becomes hard and it looks shiny or waxy. And when the skin does thaw, because literally everything is frozen, when your skin thaws, blisters filled with fluid or blood form. And you can see some pretty gnarly pictures on the internet if you are so inclined. It's pretty rough. It's pretty rough actually to look at, but that is the nature of the beast, and this is reality. And then the advanced stages of frostbite is when the skin is very hard and it's actually cold to the touch, and the skin darkens quickly. It may be a dark blue or even turn black. Yeah, once you start looking up pictures, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. It's hard. It's hard to look at, but now you'll know about it. Some people don't know they have frostbite because as it gets worse, also you just can't really feel that area anymore, which is unfortunately not helpful. You're so numb that you don't even notice it anymore. But that's why you have to look for the changes in skin color. So if you do suffer from frostbite, again, your hike is over. It's time to turn around. It's time to get out of the woods. Of course, sometimes easier said than done. I understand that, but you got to get to the emergency room right away. Your skin changes colors, becomes hard. Your skin stays numb. You can't feel anything no matter what you're doing you can't get any sort of feeling back into it. And it's going to be actually very painful as the skin starts to thaw and those blisters form. So that's another thing to be aware of. So just like water turns to ice when the temperature drops, your fingers, your hands, your toes, your feet, even your nose and ears can freeze if they're exposed to extremely cold weather for a long period of time, or, being farther away from the core of your body. These are the first areas affected by a decreased blood flow in response to cold weather. So how soon frostbite happens actually depends on how cold and windy it is outside, and it can happen faster than you actually think. In frigid weather, like stuff you'll experience up on the mountains, when we're winter hiking, it's actually possible for frostbite to happen in just 5 minutes. So this is to be taken very seriously. Cover up, have those extra layers, have the extra gloves, have the extra hat, all those good things. Now let's talk treatment. First, go to the damn hospital and let the professionals treat you. But in the meantime, you can also treat mild frostnip at home. Get into a warm place and gently re-warm the area. Drink hot fluids. You know how to get warm once you're able to get inside. And your body will feel strange as the skin starts to thaw, and it will be painful. Just kind of go with it. But if blisters form, do not pop them. And again, you should be heading to the emergency room. So in conclusion, to sum up frostbite, it's the freezing of the skin and the underlying muscles and tissue. It is a serious condition that sometimes requires amputation. There are 3 stages of frostbite: the early, intermediate, and advanced stage. Early stage includes pale or yellow skin that comes with a pins and needles feeling. The intermediate stage includes hard skin with a shine or a waxy look to it. And the advanced stage includes skin that is hard and cold to the touch and turns a black or blue color. All of which are to be taken very seriously. If you suspect frostbite out there in the cold, head on home, warm up the area, don't pop the blisters as your skin thaws, and go to the emergency room. Moving on. Next, we're going to talk about that dreaded, unexpected overnight. What to do if you get caught out there in the weather and you can't find your way back to the trail, or you can't find your way out of the woods and you have no choice but to stay the night. This is a scary decision to make, but that's why we bring the appropriate equipment to stay out there if we need to in an emergency. First things first, you need to set up a shelter, and you need to get out of the elements the best you can. If you're on an exposed summit, it's time to move back down inside the tree line, because you have a much greater chance of surviving the night inside the tree line. Now, if you are on an exposed ridge with, let's say, an injured hiker in your group and you can't move, your best bet is to dig yourself a little trench in the snow, basically how wolves do, quite literally. Snow is insulation, and that will be your best bet to survive the night if someone in your group is not mobile. But a shelter will get you out of the elements as much as possible, especially the wind. This subject could also be an entire podcast series, but some quick Adirondack-friendly shelters would be tie up a tarp tent. Basically, tie your sash or rope between 2 trees, and then you drape your tarp. Or if you have an additional bivy sack that I recommended in episode 1, you cut that open to be like a tarp, and then you drape it over the rope, tie down 4 corners, voila, you have yourself a tent to keep you out of the elements. And if you don't have anything like that in your backpack, or you only have the one bivy sack and you do not cut it, use that because you need to get inside of that. We're going to do something different. But if you don't have anything like that, another option is a tree pit, which basically find a nice sturdy evergreen tree, inside the tree line, of course, with some decent snow buildup around its base, and then dig out a small pit at the base of the tree in the snow. Obviously as the snow falls, those big trees, snow doesn't typically get right to the trunk of the tree because it has its branches, right? So there's actually space in there at the trunk. And then if you dig out some snow around it, now you have a little hut of sorts. You have actually insulation around the walls. You're going to crawl up inside by the trunk of the tree, and you're actually now covered from the top, and you're covered from the sides. So it's not a bad situation to do. It's actually pretty likely here in the Adirondacks in terms of finding a place to sleep with some insulation around as well. Now remember, this is not a hotel. This is a survival situation. It's not going to be that comfortable, but hey, it's about survival. So those are just some quick ways to get out of the elements and have a shelter that will give you a fighting chance to survive the night. You'll also want to make sure that you're wearing all dry layers and remove anything wet for the night, because wet clothing will actually make it worse. So if you can, that is what you want to do. And of course, because you're all listening to this podcast, you all have extra clothes with you. Now that your shelter is made, next it's time to build a small and controlled fire to keep you warm. In episode 2 of this Winter Hiking 101 series, I mentioned having 2 sources of fire in your backpack's fire kit, such as a lighter and some waterproof matches are what I take with me. You could also bring a ferro rod, which I also have as well, and some tinder. And I also mentioned cotton balls dipped in Vaseline as your tinder. It's a popular choice, or any commercial fire starter product that burns when wet. You might be able to find some natural tinder under the trees, again, near the base of the tree where snow hasn't gotten to it and everything's not all wet, but you also might not. So having some tinder in your fire kit is important and is something you should have with you. Now, when it comes to Adirondack hiking, of course, yes, fires are illegal in the High Peaks Wilderness, except at designated campsites in designated areas, but this podcast series applies to far beyond the ADK. So when building a fire for survival purposes, just be mindful and be very careful, but you need some heat to survive, especially in the winter. And it goes without saying, but hopefully at this point you have called for help for rescuers to come find you, but there's going to be plenty of times where you have no cell phone service back there and you are just on your own. So remember, the mountains do not care about you, and it is up to you to survive. But at this point, you have a little fire going, or you've warmed up a little bit with the fire. You have your shelter for the night, and I guess it's time to sleep, time to survive the night. Eat and drink, make a small bed of pine and spruce boughs for insulation, and get in your emergency bivy sack. These sacks reflect our own heat back at us. They're not sleeping bags, but again, they're for an emergency, and they're your best chance for survival, and they take up 0 space in your backpack, which is why I recommend having 2. But if that's the case, good luck out there. The unexpected overnight is something nobody wants to have to do, but if you have a little practice and you start to go through the motions in your head as to what you would do while you're hiking, if you let's say, you're middle of the day, you just decide, let's say I have to stay right now, right here, what would I do? You start going through those motions. When you actually are in a pinch, you'll have already kind of gone through those motions in your head many times. So it's good practice to do throughout a hike, whether it's summer or winter. Just start to take note of your environment. Oh, there was a cool little cave back there. That would be a great spot. Just take a mental note, that sort of thing. You'll start to develop the habits of noticing your environment a lot more. So I highly recommend starting to do that as part of your workflow, just, while you're hiking. But anyways, to sum up the emergency overnight section, get into the tree line, make a shelter, make a fire to warm up, put all your dry layers on, remove all your wet layers, get in that bivy sack, and pray for a miracle. And with that, I'm going to close it out here on this 3-part Winter Hiking 101 series here on the 46 of 46 podcast. I covered everything that I could think of in as much practical detail as I could think of. And I'm pretty sure there's probably things I left out, but, I hope this series has informed, educated, and entertained all of you, especially to anybody new to the wonderful world of winter hiking. As I've said many times, winter hiking is an entirely different animal than summer hiking and is to be taken very seriously. You must respect the mountains because by climbing mountains in the winter, you are putting yourself in life and death scenarios each time. So the more prepared you are mentally and physically with the right equipment, the more you'll set yourself up for success. And with that said, when you have the correct gear and the mindset towards the hike, winter hiking is even more spectacular than summer hiking. It's awesome. Those mountains do not disappoint when they're covered in snow, and magical doesn't even begin to describe them. So in closing, start small and work your way up when it comes to winter hiking. Climb small mountains first, and no, I don't mean small high peaks, I mean small mountains. Or don't even climb a mountain, just hike a couple miles down a trail to a lean-to or to a pond before climbing up mountains. Build up your skill set and your experience in a linear fashion. Dial in your personal layering needs because everybody's different before you go deep into the backcountry. Know how to use your gear before you get to the trailhead. And always hike in the winter with at least one hiking partner. And then, of course, always let someone know where you're hiking and roughly when you expect to be back. And never feel like you have to get to the top of the mountain. Always be willing to turn back if the weather turns for the worse or if daylight starts to get away from you. The mountains aren't going anywhere. No hike is worth getting yourself into an emergency for. And as the old saying goes, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Thanks for listening to this Winter Hiking 101 series right here on the 46 of 46 podcast. Check out 46of46.com and see everything I have to offer there. If you like the show, please leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you're listening. And check back on Fridays for new mountains, new stories, new guests, and new episodes right here on the 46 of 46 podcast. Remember to always leave no trace, do the rock walk, and if you carry it in, carry it out. See you on the trails, everybody, and be safe out there. Enjoy the magic of the winter season.